Hey Luke, it's Buddha Gem here, and when you're talking about the state, and gosh, I've talked a lot about this in videos, so I'm going to try to be real brief here. There's no need to speculate on how the state developed or why it developed. We know these things. It's been studied in depth. I mean, we live in a country, a state, that was developed basically out of thin air by the founding fathers, primarily James Madison. There's no mystery to it, and what I find disturbing is you're talking about this, and yet you don't mention history at all. You don't mention why the state we live in, how it developed. I mean, we know why it developed. And we know why states develop. And this is where I think your type of anarchism is going to run into trouble, because states develop to protect private property. It's not, and I'm just going to be real brief here. In 1689, we have John Locke in his second treatise on civil government. The great and chief end of men uniting into commonwealths and putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property. 1776, we had Adam Smith. The necessity of civil government grows with the acquisition of valuable property. Till there be property, there can be no government, the very end of which is to secure wealth and defend the rich from the poor. Max Weber, well, I'll get into that in a minute. And of course, my favorite quote is James Madison at the Constitutional Convention explaining the reason for the state. And he told the guys, look, the reason for this state is to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. He goes into this in some depth in Federalist Paper number 10, where he talks about factions and keeping the majority factions. That was his concern, the majority factions who would have leveling tendencies from getting together. There's no mystery about this. The state, you don't seem to really comprehend what you kind of equate the state and the government, and that's common. That's not, not a big deal. But the essential, the irreducible feature of the state, according to Max Weber, and it's pretty much an accepted definition in political science, is that its irreducible feature is it has a monopoly over the legitimate use of force and violence over a given area. The difference, if you want to understand the difference between state and government, a good example is Salvador Allende in Chile, where he won the election. That is, he was in control of the government, but he never was able to grasp control of the state. He was eventually overthrown, CIA-backed coup, Pinochet. That aside, the fact remains, states develop out of the need to protect private property. Once you have, I mean, you can see this going back through time. The reason they develop, I mean, I can give you examples in the Bible. The reason they develop, once you have so much property that you can either use it or protect it by yourself, it becomes very hard to protect it on your own. So you collude with others who have property, and they collude, and then you form a state. Okay, that's what happened in this country. That's how it happens. I mean, you didn't have landless peasants, deciding about the Constitution. We didn't have a choice. Shays' Rebellion. These things were a real wake-up call that, hey, we've got to have a stronger state in order to protect our interests. Okay, so when you ignore history, when you're trying to analyze these things and talk about Chuck E. Cheese and stuff, I just think you miss a really crucial point in understanding why states develop, how they develop, what interests their primary interests is the preservation and the protection of the propertied class. Okay, so that's my 2 cents. Have a good night, brother.